Elena Carter walked into the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council with steady steps. The towering alien leaders watched her with cold, unreadable eyes. Some smirked, others whispered among themselves, a human diplomat in their presence. They saw it as a joke. She knew what they thought. Humans were newcomers to the stars, a species barely recognized by the great empires. To them, humanity was weak, fragile, insignificant. But Elena had not come to beg. She had come to negotiate. The hall was massive, built from black stone and shimmering silver metals. It was meant to remind visitors of the council's power. But Elena did not care. She adjusted her suit, stood straight, and spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "I come on behalf of Earth to discuss the recent attacks on our colonies. We demand an end to these unprovoked assaults." Silence filled the chamber, then soft laughter. A tall alien with green reptilian scales leaned forward, his golden robes shimmering. High Chancellor Vorik of the Zarkith Dominion, one of the most powerful empires in the Council. His smile was mocking. "Demand," he repeated, his voice dripping with amusement. "Little human, you are in no position to demand anything." More laughter spread across the room. Elena's expression did not change. She knew how these creatures thought. They only respected strength. "I am here to negotiate a peaceful solution," she said, ignoring the insult. "Continuing hostilities will only lead to—" A sharp voice interrupted her. A different alien, this one with pale gray skin and piercing red eyes, leaned forward. Grand Minister Kalshur of the Drex Confederacy. His species was known for cruelty, and his reputation was even worse. "You humans have no authority here," he said. "You should be grateful we allow you to speak at all." Elena's jaw tightened, but she did not react. She had expected hostility. What she had not expected was what happened next. Kalshur stood and walked toward her, his footsteps echoing through the hall. He was twice her height, his long claws clicking together as he studied her. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed her by the collar. The room went silent. Elena did not struggle, but she met his gaze without fear. She knew what he was doing, testing her, humiliating her in front of the others, a show of power. "You are nothing," Kalshur sneered. "Your people are nothing. Perhaps you need to be reminded of your place." Then he struck her, a sharp slap across the face. Not hard enough to kill, but enough to send her to the ground. Gasps echoed around the chamber. Some aliens looked away. Others chuckled. Elena stayed down for a moment. The taste of blood filled her mouth, but she did not react. Slowly, she pushed herself up and wiped her lip. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. She thought of Earth, of the people she represented. She thought of him. A chill ran down her spine. She looked up at Kalshur, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled. A small, knowing smile. Kalshur frowned. "What is so funny, human?" Elena met his gaze and spoke 2 words. "You'll see." She turned and walked away, leaving the hall in silence. The laughter stopped. The amusement faded. A strange feeling filled the room, something none of them could understand. But a few of the older council members shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged nervous glances. They had seen that look before. That expression. It was not the look of someone defeated. It was the look of someone who knew what came next. Later that night, whispers spread through the council's halls. Kalshur returned to his chambers, irritated. The human woman's reaction unsettled him. What did she mean? He tried to push the thought away, but an uneasy feeling crept into his mind. Then a young Drex officer approached him, eyes wide with fear. "Sir, we just received a message from Earth." Kalshur frowned. "So?" The officer swallowed. It wasn't from the human government. It was personal. Kalshur narrowed his eyes. "Personal." The officer hesitated, then showed him the transmission. It was simple. Only 3 words. "I am coming." No name. No threat. Just a promise. Kalshur scoffed and waved the officer away. Foolish humans. But as he returned to his seat, something gnawed at him. That message, it felt familiar. Deep in the council archives, in records buried and forgotten, the answer waited. There were stories, whispers, a legend spoken only in fear. A name, a title, the Baba Yaga. Some dismissed it as myth, but those who had seen what he could do, they knew the truth. The officer returned, his face pale. "Sir, we received another report." Kalshur sighed. "What now?" The officer's hands shook. "A patrol fleet near the human border. It's gone." Kalshur froze. "Gone." The officer nodded. "Destroyed. Completely. No survivors." For the first time, Kalshur felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Far away, in the depths of space, a single ship moved through the void. Silent. Unstoppable. A ghost in the dark. And on that ship, a man prepared for war. He had been called many things. A monster. A demon. A nightmare. But to the Council, he would soon be known by another name. The Galactic Council chamber remained eerily silent long after Elena Carter had left. The alien leaders, once amused by her presence, now shifted uneasily in their seats. They did not understand what had just happened, but something about the human diplomat's reaction unsettled them. Kalshur, still seated at his personal quarters, replayed the message over and over in his mind. 3 simple words. "I am coming." It made no sense. Humans had no power here. Their fleets were small, their armies nothing compared to the great empires of the Council. And yet, something about those words sent a cold feeling down his spine. He scowled and dismissed the thought. He was a high-ranking member of the Drex Confederacy, a ruler of worlds. He would not be intimidated by a simple threat. But then the second report came in. A fleet of 5 Drex warships, patrolling the human border, had gone silent. No distress signals, no communication, nothing. They had simply vanished. At first, Kalshur assumed it was a malfunction. But then came the recovered footage. A shaky recording from one of the last ships before it was destroyed. The image flickered, static filling the screen. But then, something appeared. A dark shape in the void. The single human warship. It was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. No insignia, no identification. Just a sleek, black hull moving silently through space like a predator stalking its prey. Then, chaos. The recording turned to screams as someone boarded the ship. The footage cut out before the end, but not before the crew's last words were heard. A terrified voice, barely a whisper. "He's here." Then silence. Kalshur's blood ran cold. He turned to the officer trembling before him. "Who?" Kalshur demanded. "Who is he?" The officer hesitated. His voice shook as he answered. "They call him the Baba Yaga." The words sent a ripple of fear through the chamber. Some of the older council members stiffened. A few exchanged nervous glances, recognizing the name. Others looked confused, unfamiliar with the legend. Kalshur slammed a fist against the table. A human myth. A children's tale to scare fools. He stood, towering over the officer. "You expect me to believe that one man, one human, did this?" The officer swallowed. "Sir, this is not the first time his name has appeared in our records." Kalshur narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The officer pulled up classified reports, files buried deep in the Council's archives, hidden from public records. Kalshur's scaly fingers twitched as he scanned through them. Battle reports, missing fleets, entire colonies wiped out in retaliation for attacks on humans, and always a single survivor left behind to spread the message. One name whispered through every report. The Baba Yaga. Kalshur felt his hands tighten into fists. He wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but the unease in the room was real. Some of the older members of the Council, those who had been in power for centuries, looked truly afraid. Finally, one of them spoke, an elder from the auxiliary race, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was there," she said, "during the first incident, when the Tsarian Empire tried to enslave a human colony." Her pale blue eyes darkened. "They thought humans were weak. They learned the truth too late." Kalshur scoffed. "And what truth is that?" The elder's voice was grim. "Humans do not forget, and they do not forgive." A heavy silence followed. Kalshur refused to believe it. One man, one human capable of such destruction. It was impossible. Then another officer rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Sir, urgent report. A council prison ship was attacked on its way to the Drek's homeworld." Kalshur clenched his jaw. "By who?" The officer hesitated. "Not who. What?" He took a deep breath. "It was him." Kalshur's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. "Where is the ship now?" The officer's hands trembled as he showed the final footage. The prison ship, a massive Drex vessel, burning in space, hull breached, defenses shattered. Bodies of Drex soldiers floated lifelessly in the void. And then the final image. A single escape pod, drifting away. A transmission sent out on all frequencies. A deep, steady voice. Calm. Cold. "She is mine. And I am coming." Kalshur stared at the screen, his body frozen. This was no myth. This was no story. The Baba Yaga was real. And he was coming for them all. The Galactic Council was in chaos. The chamber, once a place of arrogant debates and calculated politics, had turned into a battlefield of fear and panic. Alien leaders shouted over one another, their voices filled with disbelief and dread. "The human warship destroyed 5 of our patrol fleets in under an hour," one council member screeched. "Our prison ship is gone. Every soldier aboard was executed," another added. Kalshur sat in silence, gripping the edges of his chair so tightly that his claws left deep scratches in the armrests. His mind raced through the reports. The Baba Yaga had come for his wife, and now the council feared what would happen next. "Send a fleet after him." A Drex general growled, his reptilian eyes burning with anger. "I refuse to believe that one human can stand against the full power of the council." The room fell silent for a moment. Then the auxiliary elder, the one who had spoken of humanity's past, shook her head. "You still don't understand," she murmured. "The Baba Yaga is not a fleet. He is not an army. He is a storm." Her pale blue eyes locked onto Kalshur. "And you are the one who called him." Kalshur refused to be shaken. He stood, towering over the others. "Enough." His voice thundered through the chamber. "He is just a man. A skilled warrior, perhaps, but still a human. And humans die just like the rest of us." He turned to the generals. "We will hunt him down. We will find his ship and obliterate it before he ever reaches our homeworld." One of the officers hesitated. "Sir, we have tried to track him. The ship appears and disappears at will. We do not know where he will strike next." Kalshur's eyes narrowed. "Then bait him." The room grew colder at his words. "Use the human woman," Kalshur said slowly. "Send out a transmission. Let him know where we are taking her. Force him into a trap." The silence that followed was heavy. Even those who feared the Baba Yaga more than anything hesitated at such an idea. To lure in a man like that was dangerous beyond measure. But Kalshur did not care. His pride, his power, his very rule was now under threat. He would not cower before one human. "Do it," he ordered. Hours later, across the void of space, a lone warship drifted silently. Inside, in the dim glow of a red-lit cockpit, a man watched the latest transmission from the council. A grainy image flickered on the screen. Belina Carter, bound in restraints, surrounded by Drex guards. Kalshur's voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "To the one they call the Baba Yaga, you will come to the Velcor system if you wish to see her alive." A pause. "If you do not, she will suffer." Then the transmission cut out. The man in the cockpit did not move. His face, hidden in shadow, remained unreadable, but the fingers resting on the console slowly curled into a fist. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, in a voice colder than the void itself, he whispered 2 words, "I'm coming." And across the darkness of space, his warship changed course. The hunt had begun. The Velcor system was a fortress. Drek's warships filled the space around the Council station, their massive hulls bristling with weapons. Every entrance was sealed, every corridor patrolled. If the Baba Yaga came, he would be walking into a death trap. Inside the high-security prison at the heart of the station, Elena Carter sat in a cold, dark cell. Her hands were bound in energy restraints, her face bruised from the rough treatment of her captors. But despite the pain, despite the fear, she smiled. Kalshur stood on the other side of the energy barrier, watching her with narrowed eyes. "You look amused, human," he said coldly. "Have you lost your mind?" Elena tilted her head, her smile widening. "No," she whispered, "but you will." Kalshur scoffed. "You are a diplomat. Weak, helpless. Your species is young, fragile. And yet you truly believe that one man can defeat all of us." Elena leaned forward, her voice steady. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." Kalshur's claws tightened. "I have heard the stories. I have seen the records. But they are just that, stories. No single human is invincible. No man can stand against an entire fleet." Elena's eyes darkened. "He's not a man." Kalshur opened his mouth to respond. But before he could, the alarms blared. A red glow filled the hallways. Emergency sirens screamed through the station. One word echoed through the comm channels. A single, terrifying word. "Intruder." Kalshur turned sharply, his mind racing. Impossible. No ship had been detected approaching the station. No breach had been reported. How? Then the lights flickered. A deep, unnatural silence fell over the station. The security monitors filled with static. The warships outside tried to hail the station, but only eerie silence answered. And then the first scream came. Kalshur's blood ran cold. He turned to his guards. "Find him. Kill him." The Drek soldiers rushed into the corridors, their weapons drawn. It did not matter. The Baba Yaga was already inside. The first squad never saw him coming. The lights above them flickered, shadows moving unnaturally along the walls. Then, out of nowhere, a figure dropped from the ceiling. A Drex officer barely had time to gasp before a knife slid across his throat. Blaster fire erupted, but the shots hit nothing but empty air. In the dim red glow of the alarms, a shape moved like a ghost, too fast, too precise. The Drex fell one by one, their screams cut short. By the time backup arrived, all that was left was blood. Kalshur watched from the control room, his hands shaking. He had underestimated the human. The reports had been true. This was not war. This was not a battle. This was a hunt. "Lock down the cell blocks," he barked. "Surround the human woman. He's coming for her." The Drex scrambled to follow orders, sealing off the high-security section. Dozens of soldiers lined up in formation, aiming their weapons at the only entrance. Then the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the station. In that silence, they heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, getting closer. And then a voice. Low, cold, unstoppable. "Step aside." Terror gripped the soldiers, but they held their ground. They were trained warriors. They had numbers. They had firepower. It didn't matter. The door exploded. Smoke filled the hallway. The Drex fired blindly, their shots lighting up the darkness. But the shadows moved too fast. A figure weaved through the chaos, striking like a phantom. One by one, the soldiers fell. Some screamed. Some never got the chance. By the time the smoke cleared, the last Drex stood trembling, his weapon shaking in his hands. The Baba Yaga stepped forward, his silhouette barely visible in the flickering emergency lights. The soldier dropped his gun and ran. Kalshur's breathing was ragged. His claws dug into the control panel. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a trap. Instead, it had become a slaughter. He turned to the monitors just in time to see the security feed come back online. The camera showed the hallway outside the high-security cell. A pile of bodies, blood smeared across the walls. And then the door to Elena Carter's cell sliding open. Kalshur's heart pounded as he watched her restraints fall to the floor. She rubbed her wrists, stepping forward with a calm expression. Then she turned to the camera. The Baba Yaga stood beside her. His face was still hidden in shadow, but his voice came through, clear and cold. "You took something from me." He stepped closer, staring directly into the camera. "Now, I'm taking everything from you." The screen cut to static. Kalshur stumbled back, his mind screaming in panic. He had to escape. He had to get off this station. Then, behind him, the door hissed open. Kalshur turned, his breath catching in his throat. And the last thing he saw was a pair of cold, human eyes staring at him from the darkness. The Galactic Council station was in chaos. The mighty Drex warriors, feared across the stars, were running, screaming, dying. The fortress that had stood for centuries was now a tomb. In the high-security sector, Kalshur's body slumped to the floor, his lifeless eyes staring in shock. The Baba Yaga stood over him, unflinching. Elena Carter stepped beside her husband, rubbing her sore wrists where the restraints had been. "Is it done?" she asked. John Carter, known to the galaxy as the Baba Yaga, knelt, wiping his blade clean. "Not yet." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet rage beneath it. He turned to Elena, his eyes softening. "Are you hurt?" Elena exhaled, shaking her head. "Nothing I can't handle." John nodded. Then his face hardened as he pulled a communicator from Kalshur's corpse. He pressed a button. "This is Carter. Broadcast my message to every council member still on this station." Static. Then a trembling voice replied. We don't negotiate with terrorists." John smirked. "Then don't negotiate. Just listen." He stepped over the bodies, walking toward the main corridor. His voice turned ice cold. "You thought you could take my wife. You thought you could kill her and walk away." His footsteps echoed through the empty halls. "But you forgot one thing." He reached the security doors. They slid open, revealing rows of terrified council guards, their weapons raised. John didn't stop. "You forgot what happens when you push a human too far." The guards fired. The corridor lit up with blaster fire, but John was already moving. He weaved through the shots with terrifying speed, his blade flashing. The first guard screamed as his weapon was torn from his hands. Then silence as John struck him down. Another tried to retreat. He didn't make it. One by one, the soldiers fell. Some tried to fight. Some tried to run. None of it mattered. Elena followed behind, stepping over bodies. She had seen John fight before. She had seen what he could do. But this was something else. This wasn't war. It was a reckoning. In the council chamber, the remaining delegates huddled together, panic spreading. The walls shook as explosions rocked the station. "This is impossible," one of them shouted. "We had an army, a fleet." A loud boom sounded outside. "He's coming," someone whispered. The main doors burst open. Smoke poured into the chamber. A single figure stepped through. John Carter. His clothes were stained with blood. His knife dripped. His expression was unreadable. The council members trembled. These were the most powerful beings in the galaxy, rulers of entire civilizations. But in that moment, they were nothing more than frightened prey. One of them, a Yuvani ambassador, forced himself to speak. "You can't do this," he stammered. "The laws of war." John's knife buried itself into the wall next to the ambassador's head. "There are no laws anymore," John said flatly. "Not for you." The ambassador swallowed hard. We surrender." John tilted his head. "Do you?" He turned to Elena. "What do you think?" Elena crossed her arms. "I think they didn't show mercy to me." She looked at the trembling council members. "I think they never planned to." John nodded. "That's what I thought." He raised the communicator again, connecting to the station's main broadcast. "This is John Carter," he said, his voice steady. "To any remaining council loyalists, lay down your weapons. The station is mine." Silence. Then distant voices on the comms. Officers surrendering. Soldiers dropping their weapons. The council had fallen. Elena looked at her husband. "What now?" John exhaled. "Now we make sure they never do this again." As he spoke, outside the station, the council's fleet was burning. The hunt wasn't over yet. The Galactic Council station was silent. The once great rulers of the galaxy sat trembling in their grand chamber, their power shattered. Outside, wreckage floated in the void, remnants of their once mighty fleet. John Carter, the man they had foolishly crossed, had taken everything from them. But he wasn't done yet. Elena Carter stood beside him, arms crossed. Her gaze swept over the defeated council members. She had once been a diplomat, believing in peace in negotiation. But tonight, diplomacy had died. One of the surviving counselors, a reptilian Vokhtar, swallowed hard. Please," he stammered. "Killing us will change nothing. The galaxy needs leadership." John tilted his head, considering. Then he grabbed the Vokhtar by the throat and slammed him against the wall. "The galaxy needs justice," he growled. "And you bastards don't know the meaning of the word." The other counselors flinched. None of them dared to speak. John released the Vokhtar, letting him slump to the floor. "I'm not here to kill you," he said coldly. "Not yet." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Then what are we here for?" John smirked. "To send a message." He stepped toward the council's central console, activating the station's broadcast system. Across hundreds of worlds, every major network flickered to life. Every species, every leader, every soldier in the galaxy was about to witness history. John Carter's face filled their screens. His voice was steady. "This is John Carter. Some of you know me as the Baba Yaga." He let the words sink in. "The Galactic Council thought they could take my wife. They thought they could break her." His expression darkened. "They thought I would let it happen." He glanced at Elena. She gave him a small nod. "They were wrong," John continued. "The Council is finished. Their armies are broken. Their fleets are burning." His eyes burned with cold fury. "And now I give them to you." He turned back to the cowering council members. "From this moment, every species they've oppressed, every world they've conquered, you decide their fate." The council members gasped. You can't." One of them sputtered. "They'll tear us apart." John shrugged. "Then you'd better start running." Elena activated the emergency pods. One by one, the counselors were dragged away by security drones, forced into escape shuttles. "You're giving them a chance to live?" Elena asked as she watched the shuttles launch. John's smirk was cold. "I'm giving the galaxy a chance to decide." Out in the void, the escape pods shot toward different worlds. Some toward planets they had once ruled, others toward colonies they had enslaved. Each one carried a marked man, a former tyrant, left to face the people they had wronged. Elena let out a slow breath. "They won't last long." "No," John agreed. "They won't." The message had been sent. The galaxy had seen what happened when you crossed a human, and no one would make that mistake again. The escape pods had vanished into the void, each carrying a disgraced council member toward their own fate. Some would be torn apart by the very people they had ruled. Others might try to hide, but they would never feel safe again. The Galactic Council was no more, and the galaxy knew exactly who had brought it down. John Carter stood on the command deck of the Council station, staring out at the wreckage. Fires still burned in the shattered remains of the fleet. Emergency lights flickered on the hulls of crippled warships. The most powerful empire in the galaxy had been destroyed, not by an invading armada, but by one man. Elena stepped beside him, her expression unreadable. "It's over," she said softly. John didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped the edge of the console, his mind still turning. "It's never over," he murmured. She frowned. "The Council is gone. Their fleets are destroyed. What else is there?" John exhaled. "Power never disappears. It just waits for someone new to take it." He turned to face her. "We made a statement tonight. But what happens next?" Elena crossed her arms. "That's not our problem. We didn't come here to rebuild the galaxy. We came here to end the ones who took me." John smirked. "You sound like me now." She shrugged. "Maybe I finally understand." A beeping sound interrupted them. The station's long-range scanners had picked up multiple signals. John glanced at the screen. "Looks like the galaxy is waking up," he muttered. Dozens of ships were approaching, some from former Council-controlled worlds, others from independent factions, pirates, rebels, military forces, all drawn by the same thing. The fall of the Council had left a vacuum, and now every ambitious warlord, every broken world, every hidden power in the galaxy wanted to claim what was left. John turned to Elena. "We should go." She nodded. "Where?" He thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that doesn't know our names." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And if trouble finds us?" John chuckled. "Then we remind them who we are." He tapped his communicator. Evac sequence initiated. The station's hangar doors opened, revealing the sleek black ship waiting for them. They walked together, side by side, as alarms blared behind them. The station was rigged to self-destruct, ensuring no one could claim it. The galaxy would never have a second Council. As they boarded the ship, John looked back one last time. The station, the Council, the war, it was all over. But the legend of the Baba Yaga had only just begun. With a quiet hum, the ship lifted off, disappearing into the stars.